Hello, and welcome to the Science Fiction and Fantasy Marketing Podcast, the show where we help you establish your author brand, increase the size of your audience, and sell more books. I'm Lindsay Baroker, and I'm here with my two co-hosts.
I'm Jeff Poole.
And I'm Joe Lallo.
And we've got a good guest for you today. He's been here before, but before I introduce him, I just want to say thanks to everyone at the 20 Books to 50K conference and also Dean and Chris's writing workshop that came up and said hello and that you listened to the podcast. It was really great to know there were people out there, although now I'm kind of nervous knowing that people are actually listening. Before, I just assumed they were downloading the show and deleting it, but we will attempt to continue to give you some good information. And tonight, to top things off, start things off, something like that, is Chris Fox, who, as some of you may have heard at the conferences, has just kind of done a successful cross-genre launch. This is Chris Fox, known for writing to market, but this was not to market, and he launched it, gosh, I think into the top 100 on Amazon. Is that right, Chris?
Yeah, it peaked at number 93 in the entire store.
Awesome. And that's like without a book bub. Usually I have to have a book bub to get that kind of ranking. And, it stayed, it seems like in the top 200 or so for quite a while. And, it's like 6-7 weeks later now, and it's still selling pretty well. Chris has been on the show before. I'll put the links to the past episodes in the show notes if you want to talk to him. But I guess I'll just, ask you, it's been about 1.5 years. What have you been up to? And besides, you've got a couple new books out, I think, since last we talked to you.
Yeah, I think I put out 5 or 6 books since the last time we talked. I've done 2 things this year of note. The first was I called 12 Weeks to a Trilogy. So I wrote 3 books in about 3 months, actually overshot it and did finish in time. But I put those out as a trilogy, and they did fairly well, but they got to be the example of what not to do since I kind of screwed the covers up. And then later this year, I realized, I need to slow down a little bit. And doing the challenge, while fun, really kind of pressured me to not experiment enough with the blurb and the cover. So later this year, I put out Tech Mage. That's the one that just came out. And as you mentioned, it's doing phenomenally well. I'm very grateful.
Awesome. I was actually going to ask you about that. I think you did a trilogy there, kind of a spin-off of the Void Wraith stuff. Is that right?
Yeah, they're direct sequels, but it's enough of a new entry point that if you haven't read the previous books, you can jump in.
Because I was launching a spin-off around the same time, and I was watching yours, and I was watching mine, and neither of them, I think all our fans went out and bought them, but they didn't really stick and stay in the rankings as one might hope they would do. It sounds like you think maybe the covers for yours weren't quite to market?
Yeah, I messed up a couple of things. The cover on these books, they're lovely if you look at them at full size, but for a thumbnail, they're too busy. There's too many explosions. There's not enough contrast on the cover, and you can't read the title. So I think that really did a lot of damage to the book. And this last launch, I tried to do something that would correct all those problems because I theorized that would sell a lot more copies, and it looks like it was right.
Awesome. Because I found on the show that people really like it when we talk about what we did wrong. So that's why I like to analyze my own stuff too. With mine, I kind of, I was doing like the younger generation of characters, so it became more of a YA story. And then I look in the top 100 YA sci-fi, and it's all dystopian. There's no spaceships, none of that.
So those are some of our best shows. What not to do.
I've definitely done both. I've been a cautionary tale more than once, probably as often as I've succeeded.
So after you had that trilogy, what made you decide, I'm just going to do space fantasy? Forget the to-market stuff. It's just going to straddle everything.
Well, I kind of thought, I was going to keep writing in the Void Wraith universe, and I will. But after doing 3 books and having it not perform quite as well as I wanted it to, I decided I wanted to take a break. And far enough that my definition of writing to market has really evolved. So what I wrote in Write to Market, it needs an update, and I will do probably in 2018 an updated Write to Market to talk about some of the new ideas that I have. But this go round, I decided to try to find an audience, not necessarily a niche, not necessarily books that had already been written that I could model, but instead create something that I felt probably had an audience, and then see whether or not it took. And in my case, I decided to write epic fantasy in space. So there are other books out there that are somewhat similar to mine. You've got magic in space, but if you look at, say, Glenn Stewart has been on the show a couple of times. He very much writes hard science fiction that has magic added in. And I'm doing a lot more of the fantasy side of things and a lot less of the science fiction. So not seeing a lot of people doing kind of exactly the thing that I tried to do with Tech Mage.
All right, it's cool. It sounds like an interesting concept, and we're obviously interested in your launch. Just as it seems to be everything in indie publishing, a well-planned launch is a pretty lengthy process. You put a lot of thought into. How does especially if you're launching a series, so how does the performance of the first book when you do a new launch affect how you progress forward? If it over or underperforms, are there adjustments that you make?
I think so. It's vital that you get that right, and if you screw up the first book launch, it's really going to cause problems for the rest of the series. It's possible to recover some lost ground when you put out sequels, but really, if the first in series doesn't do well, you've got problems, and you've got to ask yourself the challenging question: is it worth it to keep writing this series, or am I going to put out book 3 and 4 and 5 and not sell very many copies because the first one didn't do very well?
A lot of times when you're releasing subsequent book, I mean, one of the nice things about doing a series is when you release subsequent books, you also can funnel people back to the beginning. You have to funnel people back to the beginning if you want new readers. So as you say, like you release sequels, you can recover a little bit. I mean, obviously, I should say, is there ever going to be a situation where you're just going to abandon the series with books left unpublished? Like, do you ever have a 5-book launch planned and you have the first 3 books finished and the first 2 books do dismally and you decide not even to release the third and abandon the series? Is that ever a thing that could happen?
Actually, that's exactly what just happened with Ganog Wars. Originally, it was planned to be 5 books, and it wasn't doing well after the second book came out. And so I took a really hard look at the series, and I rewrote the third book. I was going to have it be kind of a lead-in to the fourth book, but instead, I just wrapped it up in a trilogy. So I will never not finish a series. I hate the idea that readers are going to be always waiting for an ending, but I might make a series shorter than I'd originally intended, as long as I can give it a compelling ending that sort of rewards the readers that have stuck with it.
All right, so let me ask you this. How much advertising do you do when it comes to releasing a third or a fourth book in the series when compared to the first?
Almost none. So what I'll do for advertising on sequels is I will target everybody who has ever liked any of the previous books, and I'll set up a lookalike audience very quickly, and then I'll just sort of ping those people to make sure that they know that sequels are out. So I'll have maybe 1 to 2 Facebook ads running, possibly an AMS ad just to get a little bit of visibility on the sequel, and then beyond that, it's just all mailing lists. Really, I think it's all about the first book in series, and that's where I push my promotional efforts.
Yeah, that was pretty much my second question pertaining to that one is, do you give any added attention to the first when releasing a sequel? But it sounds like they pretty much do the same things I do. Is like, there's not much I can do to advertise like a 6th in a series. You just try and get people back hooked to the first, and that way they can trickle on down the line again.
Exactly.
All right. Okay, Lindsay, over to you.
Alrighty, so I'm curious, we've talked on the show and at the conference and everything about rapid release strategy, let's write 3 books before we launch the first one. And you did not do that this time. You've got the pre-order up for the second one, but it looks like it was 2-3 months later than you released the first. Were you just confident that it was going to be so awesome that people would buy it, or did you just decide to try something different here?
I was kind of out of time, so I put out the Ganog Wars. I was hoping that they did better than they actually did, and they didn't. And since they weren't performing as well as I wanted, I needed to get another book out quickly. So rather than finish up Tech Mage and then write the sequel Voidworm, as soon as Tech Mage was ready, I published it.
Have you found that people are following through and pre-ordering it with the 2 months break in between?
Yeah, and what surprises me is I listed the pre-order for $4.99, which is more expensive than I've ever done before, and I've already had over 1,000 pre-orders. I'll probably break 1,500 before the book releases, which is far more than I've ever had before.
Nice. And you decided to launch in Kindle Unlimited. I was going to say, if you get enough pre-orders, you could make a list, but I guess that's not going to happen when we're exclusive to Amazon. Are you still liking Kindle Unlimited then for launching new books? And
Very much so.
All your stuff is in there, right?
For the time being, I'm starting to pull the nonfiction out finally and to put that wide at various other stores, just because I make so little. I make like 25 cents, for a full read on one of my nonfiction books. So those are finally coming out of KU, but all the fiction's still in there.
Okay. If I may jump in real quick as you're talking about this, I've got a couple of viewer questions for you that on our YouTube chat here. First one from viewer Jin. She's asking, what would he consider a landmine when launching book 1?
A landmine when launching book 1, you want to make sure that you get everything right. So I just went over this in the talk that I gave at 20 Books Vegas. You really need to make sure that your cover is amazing and that the thumbnail is amazing and it has the correct elements on it and that you can see those elements when it's a thumbnail and read the title. You want to make sure that you've tested your blurb and your tagline and that those are converting well, because really what's going to determine if your book is successful You can run a bunch of ads, but if your conversion is low because your cover and your title and your blurb aren't good, then it's going to sink like a rock, which is what happened with Ganog Wars for me. I made decent money, but only off of the back of people that were already reading my fiction. Whereas with TechMage, because I got everything right, and I have the right cover, and I have the right blurb and tagline through testing, that's why it took off. So the landmine, I think, is launching prematurely, and that's exactly what I did with Ganog Wars, because I was in the middle of this challenge trying to write and edit them at the same time, and I didn't give the time and attention to launching that I really should have.
And she just wrote a quick question here. I think to clarify, what has he done that he now considers a do not?
What have I done that I now consider a do not? There's no tactic I wouldn't try again, but I'm slowing down my launches effectively and taking a little bit more time to make sure that I've gotten everything perfectly. So I wouldn't rush through launching again. I guess it is the one thing maybe I wouldn't do.
All right, and one other viewer question I have for you by the name of from Nikolai. He says, does he run book 1 launch ads at a loss, expecting to make it up as the series grows?
Only for the first 5 days. After that, I'm going to turn off any ads that are not performing. So what I did leading up to TechMage is about 3 weeks before the pre-order went live, I started driving about $20 a day in ads. And I was constantly kind of expanding those and manipulating them and experimenting and trying to figure out which taglines and blurb were working for me. And during that time I spent, I'm going to guess, maybe $500 over the course of 3 weeks. And I got enough pre-orders to pay for about half of it. So I lost maybe $250. But in the process, I learned who my audience was, which meant that when the book went live, within a couple of days after launch, I had made that money back and more. So I only did it at a loss because I felt like I could learn from the experience, and I wouldn't do that long term.
Yeah, it's definitely a good policy. Like I mean, as we've been learning from recent guests, the biggest, most challenging part of running successful ad campaigns is figuring out the return on investment that's worthwhile. And if there is no return on investment, then there's no point in running the ad campaign. All right, but so back to the subject of cross-genre. A lot of the stuff that is mainstream right now is cross-genre. Like the Marvel Cinematic Universe has got magic and science, and Star Wars has got magic and science. But it's also unmistakable that cross-genre stuff seems to be harder to market in literature. So what do you think defines a cross-genre story that will or won't be hard to market?
I think that as long as you are spelling out the elements that are involved in your cross genre in a way that fans can recognize them, you have a chance to find your audience. So in the case of my book, if you look at the first cover, you can see this guy in power armor in space in orbit over a planet. You know that you've got the technology angle. You can see a spell in his hand. And then underneath him, you can see dragons. So you know there's going to be dragons and there's going to be magic, and that's reinforced by the title. I tried to make it as clear as possible that was the case. And I think that by setting those reader expectations, you give yourself a better chance of people accepting a cross-genre book.
And do you feel like when you have the cross-genre stuff like that, do you feel like it's easier to pitch? Like, again, when we talk cross-genre, and in this case, and in most cases, the two genres we're talking about are fantasy and sci-fi.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel as though it's easier to pitch something as a fantasy with sci-fi elements or a sci-fi with fantasy elements?
I think that both of them are going to be the same. Really, it comes down to presentation. You could do, a fantasy book that's got a little sci-fi or vice versa, whatever interests you, and you're going to find readers that are into it. What I did this time around is I launched hard at the science fiction audience, because that's the people that I have. I have a lot of space opera and military science fiction fans. But what I'm doing when I come out with the second book on November 30th, I'm relaunching TechMage, and this time around I'm focusing more on the lit RPG crowd who seem to love it, and then also on the fantasy crowd. So I'm tapping into more audiences, trying to expand that reach, but I'm kind of doing it, one at a time in a slice.
Do you deliberately write your cross-genre books with the hopes that some of the fans from your existing series will follow you over, or you just assume you'll be targeting a different slice of the reader pie and not worry about it?
I absolutely came in with that mindset. So my long-term goal is to write a Shattered God. That's my epic fantasy series. I want that to be my magnum opus. I still don't feel like I'm good enough to write that, but to get fans to come from military science fiction all the way over to epic fantasy is really hard. And so I'm trying to trick them by giving them a cover that looks like military science fiction, but a story that reads like fantasy. And that's worked really well so far. I do get some bad reviews from people who read military science fiction and don't like fantasy, But a lot of people, about roughly the same amount, have never read fantasy and are giving it a try and finding they like it. So it is a way for me, I think, to drag part of my audience, at least, over from military science fiction eventually to epic fantasy.
I like this idea of pitching kind of different demographics or fan bases, I guess, with subsequent launches in your series, like trying more fantasy with the second book. Are you kind of going to use Facebook ads to target those folks, really get really in there to the niche?
Yeah, definitely. Facebook will be probably the bulk of my advertising when the book launches. I have a few newsletter swaps with authors, but by and large, I think it's going to be almost exclusively advertising.
Do you think part of your success was that you picked kind of big sweeping genres like, space opera and swords and sorcery? You said epic fantasy. I'm kind of thinking of people doing like weird westerns or something that's really quite niche. It might be harder to like hit the top 100 with something like that, I would think. What are your thoughts on that?
I would agree. I think that to an extent, if you have a good enough cover and blurb, you might kind of bleed outside of your genre and get more people to come. But if you're writing a weird Western, yeah, I would definitely temper your hopes. Like if I broke the top 1,000 with a weird Western, I would be ecstatic.
Sorry, weird Western authors in the audience. We didn't mean to shatter your dreams.
Yeah, you can still make decent money at it, and there is less competition, and I'm one that'll buy them. I'm all over those books whenever I see them, but not enough people are, unfortunately, at this point.
True. And it's such a kind of, sometimes the label that something gets given may actually hurt you in the marketing sphere. Like to this day, I'm like, lit RPG, what the heck is lit RPG? But as soon as it's explained, I'm like, oh, I love World of Warcraft. Maybe I'd like these. But it sounds, I don't know. It doesn't sound like a selling point to me.
Yeah, it's not something that I read a lot of. I've read a few of them, and I do enjoy some of them. But as much as I would expect to love it, because I've played so many MMOs and I like fantasy and I like science fiction, the idea of being trapped in a video game, we saw that in Ready Player One. We saw it, going all the way back to Tron, really. I don't know. I feel like it's been done, and I'm less interested in it. So if I wanted to make money, lit RPG is a great way to go. But I'm kind of branching out in different directions.
Yeah, that sounds like a good policy. You got to go with what you're passionate with. And
Absolutely.
you mentioned, a couple of times that you got to have like amazing covers. So if you're doing sort of a cross-genre thing, how do you decide on what you want to emphasize on the cover? Like, is there one genre do you do a mashup, or do you kind of focus more on one genre?
I try to do a little sleuthing and figure out what the audience is into. So in the case of Tech Mage, I know that military science fiction fans, they love power armor, they love mechs, they love spaceships. So I kind of narrowed it down to two possible options. It was going to be somebody in power armor, one of my protagonists, or it was going to be a starship fighting a dragon. And I did actually get both covers made, but one of them became one of the later books in the series, because I think those are the two that really say to people, hey, this is elements that you recognize, but there's also a new twist to it.
Now, regarding covers, you mentioned earlier that you had a failure with some of your covers because they were too busy to read at thumbnail size. And you also said that it's useful to put together a cover that, it's always a good idea to put together a cover that sets reader expectation correctly. So if you end up cross-genre and you sort of have a lot of elements that need to be included, how do you really strike the balance with making sure that all of the elements are present, but it still reads at the smaller size?
I think you need to pick two and not do what I did, because I said to myself when I did the Ganog Wars, okay, I've got kaiju versus mechs, and I've got nameless ones who are coming over from the previous series, which are basically like eldritch things, like H.P. Lovecraft style. I need to get all this stuff onto my covers, and I did. And you look at the cover, and I've got like a bug leg extending onto the book, and there's a mech over here, and he's fighting a giant kaiju like Godzilla, and it's just too busy. But if I had picked just one or two elements, like I did with Tech Mage, where it's just dragon, guy in power armor, and I just went with that. So reducing the number of elements that you're doing down to its bare minimum, I think, will really help you stand out and not have a cover that's too busy as a thumbnail.
Now, another thing that I've often wondered about, you see a lot of traditionally published books, the author name and the author name is as big or bigger than the title. But more to the point, we're talking about the images and how the image will read, but do you think it's important also to have the title legible at the thumbnail size, or do you think just a catchy image is going to be enough for people?
I think that you're better off if your title is readable. You might still get by if the image is good enough and they can't read the title. But really, when somebody's eye is roaming down the page and they're looking at those first top 20 books, the big question is it enough to stop them? And your image is probably going to get their eye to stop if you do it right. But when it stops, what they're registering in their brain is really going to be based off of what they can read. So it's very, very important, I think, to have that title be legible. And it worked really well for me.
With regards to cover, is it important for you to depict an actual scene from the book so the reader has an idea of what to expect, or you just shoot for getting the right elements? For example, spaceship, aliens, laser battles, and so on.
I think most fans will forgive you if you don't use a scene from the book. I personally find that horrifying because, I'm a diehard geek. I want to have scenes from my books. And so I make sure that I always do. But if you had, a dragon and a starship, and it turns out that exact dragon and starship are in your book, very few people are going to come back after they finish and be like, "Hey, that's not the right cover."
Yeah, I feel the same way. I've always enjoyed having a direct scene right from the book, right on the cover, so people are like, "Ooh, let's really see if that's going to happen here." So, I've got a viewer question for you from let's see, from Tom Sutton. He asks, when S.M. Sterling started the Embersville series, he crossed maybe 4 genres as the series progressed. If you start with a targeted audience, at what pace do you include the subgenres?
Slowly. When I wrote No Such Thing as Werewolves, I did like 4 genres all at once, and I found that about 50% of the people who pick that book up bail before book 2 because it's just too much. A lot of people can't handle something with a thriller pace that is also including tropes from a lot of different genres. It's just too much. So, starting over, I try to ground it firmly in one genre with elements of another, and then if I've got a third and a fourth genre, I'm going to kind of seed those in more slowly.
Okay, I have to make my comment on the whether you should have the scene on the cover thing because I just was in a group where somebody was saying, "What do you guys think of my cover?" And it's this beautiful like alien landscape with a big circle in the middle. And I said, "That's great, man, but everybody in space opera has spaceships on the front." He's like, "But the circle is the spaceship." And like, I can't tell, man. It's not going to sell. And I've made that mistake where you're giving like this really detailed thing to the cover designer and it ends up not really looking like anything that's selling and it hurts you, I think. But that's just my comment there. I did want to say that I think that doing the ads on the pre-orders, that's actually a really cool idea. I hadn't thought of that before, and sort of tinkering and seeing what's converting before your book even goes live. Did you learn anything specific from that, or did anything surprise
Yes.
you?
Quite a few things. So I went with a bunch of different taglines, and the one that ended up winning out and getting the lowest cost per click on the most number of ads was not the one that I would have picked. So the one that's currently on my product page is "Enslaved and Forced to Fight Dragons." I mean, I thought that one was okay, but I didn't think it was nearly as good as some of the others. But that was the one that converted. And the second I put that on the product page, I started getting more sales every single day organically without having to do anything else. My ads became more effective. Amazon pedaled a little bit more on my behalf. So I think what I learned is if you can get down into the kind of nitty gritty and really know this stuff before your book launches, you're way more prepared to kind of take advantage of Amazon and get them to promote the book for you by having something that converts well.
That's awesome. I love that, and I'm going to try that on my next trilogy that I'm releasing. I have to ask, did your other taglines mention dragons? Because we're pretty sure on this show that dragons sell books.
They do. And I mentioned it in 3 of the other ones. So 4 of the taglines had dragons in them, and this was the one that did the best. All of the ones that didn't have dragon in it didn't do it as well. And I don't think you necessarily need dragons in your tagline, but yeah, dragons sell.
If you have a dragon in your book, you got to take advantage of that, I think. Especially if it's no, I'm not going to go there. We won't talk about the smutty books today. Chris is a good, wholesome guy. But I'm curious, was this Facebook ads, or did you try Amazon ads or BookBub, PPC, or anything else?
This was exclusively Facebook ads, and the reason for that is the reporting is so much faster and better. So trying to do it on Amazon and wait 2 or 3 days and hope you get the right data, it's not enough for you to test. Whereas Facebook, I knew within hours whether or not an ad was working, and if it wasn't, I killed it.
That's true. With the Amazon ads, you kind of take in the screen. Is this thing on? Has it started yet?
72 hours later, your sales will start showing up.
Now, I don't think you can do affiliate links with the pre-orders, or you don't get credit for it if you do. So were you just kind of going by, you hadn't announced it to anybody else yet, so you knew those sales were mostly coming from the advertising?
Exactly. I did a very quiet pre-order. I didn't tell my list, didn't tell anybody that the book was available. Although I did mention it in some of my YouTube videos that I do for writers, so that was probably a mistake, and did result in more early sales that sort of clouded the data. Um, it's possible, I'm not going to admit to this definitely, that I may have used affiliate links for the ads to get additional data, and that was very, very helpful because that's the only way to really know which ad is converting.
Did you actually get credit for the sales, or were you just kind of seeing how many clicks you got on the affiliate link?
You didn't get credit for the sales until the day that the book went live, but when it did, then all of a sudden I could see how all of the ads had performed. So I knew on launch day how it was doing.
All right,
And in the
cool.
meantime, yeah, it was cost per click and how many clicks it was getting was sort of what I was tracking.
All right, I'm taking notes here. I'm going to steal this idea. And, aside from the ads, what else did you do for the launch? Because I feel like I saw you say somewhere that you didn't spend huge piles of money on the ads. Is that right?
Yeah, instead of spending money, which is brute forcing it, I spent time, and I refined my ads much more quickly and much more frequently. What I've done with previous launches is I typically make like a suite of 10 or 20 ads or however many I did, and I'd let them run for weeks at a time and wouldn't do a lot of modification. And instead, I spent an hour to an hour and a half every single day for the entire pre-order period and into the launch, tweaking ads. I would sit down every single day, and let's say I paused 4 ads. I would make new ads to replace all 4 of those ones that had been duds, I guess. And then I took it a little bit further and I did something new that I've never done in a launch before. I created the website magitechchronicles.com. And if you go there, I've got an amazing video of my magic system. I've got a whole bunch of artwork, so way, way beyond what I need for covers. I've had characters made and concept art, and I typed up a bunch of lore about the world and the universe and explained, a whole bunch of different things. I have star charts, and I threw all that stuff up there. And what I found is that people started finding the site through a couple simple advertisements that I did, and many of them joined the mailing list and went on to buy the book. And then those people who buy the book on Amazon, they're very excited to realize there's that much kind of free lore that they can delve into and sort of immerse themselves further in the universe. So I've always kind of wanted to do that, but I've never created kind of extra content like that before. And it was both really, really fun, and it seems to be working to get fans to stick with the series.
Very cool. Are you pretty much committed to doing a long series then after investing that much time in sort of the start of it?
If it had tanked really badly, I probably wouldn't have done it as fast. But yeah, I'm definitely going to do at least 10 books, probably more. And that's because this is the same universe as my Shattered Gods universe. So the basic premise is that the gods were all killed. They wiped each other out in what was called the Gods' War. And now mages can go to their bodies and actually pillage magic. And that's how they get their magic. So you've got a bunch of interstellar empires that are set up around which bodies of dead gods they control. And the fantasy version was kind of set in a world like that, where, maybe in a forest you'd have the body of a god. And all I really did is create an extension of that where, I'm having the same thing in space. And it's been so fun, but it's using a system that I've been working with since I was 18. So I have almost limitless content.
Very cool. Now, you're kind of been a trilogy guy up until now. What's made you decide I'm going to do 10 books in this series?
I made a mistake with Void Wraith. What I should have done, it was originally going to be a trilogy, and I stuck to that. When you see a book, you absolutely just hit it out of the park, and everyone seems to love it. The smart thing to do is to milk that into a series. And I didn't do that, and I just made it a trilogy. And while I made great money, if I had kept flogging books out and done it quickly, I would have made a lot more money. And now that I have an opportunity to do that with Magitech Chronicles, I just want to try and push it as far as I can because I'm having so much fun writing the books.
Awesome, and I'm going to pass you back to Joe, but I did want to point out, because we might have glossed over it because we went over so fast, that you were actually adjusting your tagline on your Amazon book description, right? Not the ad copy necessarily?
I would do the ad copy, and then whichever ad copy performed better would make it onto the product page.
Okay,
and I would oh, go ahead.
Did you also do your tagline on the book page? Is that where
I did.
taglines
Yeah,
came
I
from?
tested it everywhere. So I would put it on my website. I tried it with my mailing list, and I would also try it in ads. And every single day, I would rotate in one of the various taglines that seemed to be performing well, and just kind of track my conversion to see what happened.
All right. So you obviously have an established audience, and even though this isn't necessarily going to capture all of your established audience, that's not no one. And a lot of our listeners don't have as large an audience as you. So if this was, for example, your first series, what about this launch would you do differently?
if it was my first series and I didn't have kind of the power that I have now with, a large list to work with, I would delay the launch by a few months and I would start getting to know the authors in my genre. I would do a lot more careful, slow research at a very low ad spend every day to make sure that I knew exactly who my audience was. And I try to network with the authors in my genre so that when I was ready to launch, maybe I could get one or two decent sized authors to launch for me. And if I didn't have a list to work with, I'd probably try to do a giveaway first and get some sort of giveaway list just so I have something to swap with other authors. Because you need to be able to do that. If you're not having some way to boost your visibility at launch, unless you do everything perfectly and Amazon just sort of floats your book for you, you're going to struggle to get kind of the sales numbers that you're after as a new author.
Now, you say you might do a giveaway first. Would that be a dedicated piece of fiction, or just like, a gift card?
You can kind of do it however you want. I've seen people do the whole Kindle loaded up with books. In my case, I'd probably write a reader magnet and just put it on a landing page and start going to communities that I thought would be interested in free fiction, and give it away. And I'd give it the best cover that I could, and as compelling a blurb as I could, and hope to get signups that way.
That's what happens when you have mute selected. Like, where's the mute button? But okay. Is there anything you wish you would have done on your first launch that you're currently doing when it comes to launching a title?
Quite a few things. When I put my first book out there, I looked for literally every single advertising site that I could find, and I paid for them all. So I spent probably, I don't know, $4,000 or $5,000 on No Such Thing as Werewolves when I first launched it, and most of those ads did nothing at all. So the vast majority of them, like Kindle Daily Nation, I spent like $600, and I got like, I don't know, 18 sales probably as a result of it. Doing it over again today, I would focus a lot less on advertising and on trying to get eyeballs on my book, and a lot more on making sure that my prose is amazing and that all the parts of the product page are as great as they can be, because really that's what we can do and do for free as authors that's going to get the biggest bang for your buck.
That pretty much ties into my second question there for you. Is there anything first-time authors should be doing, but you see that they typically aren't?
Developing a thick skin. So one of the problems that people run into, like let's say you get yourself a 1 or a 2 star review on your book, we tend to turtle. We'll go into a fetal position because it's painful. People are sort of kicking you right in the childhood when they mock one of the things that you spent years making. But those reviews are solid gold, and they're going to help you grow as a writer if you are willing to set aside your pride and your ego and look at what these people said. So not every negative review is accurate or even useful. Some of them are just one word, but some of them will tell you that there's something wrong with your writing, or there's something that you could fix, maybe your characterization or your pacing, maybe you've got too many typos. But just taking an honest look at the kind of feedback that you're getting, and taking a deep breath and accepting that it's not a reflection of you, the writer. It's just a reflection of the writing that you've done up till now, and that whatever you do from here forward can be better. So, it's worth studying and not allowing it to derail you when you see one of these reviews.
Yeah, when you get 3 reviews in a row that say author uses cloying use of this particular word over and over, it's time to pay attention and say, okay, I'll tone that down or something there. I have a viewer question for you. Another question from Tom. He says, how do you decide what magic to replace with tech? Example, magic swords becoming lightsabers.
It's just personal preference. So if I was trying to do writing to market like I had done with Destroyer, I did a lot more study and I tried to mimic things a little more carefully. For Magitech Chronicles, I just made stuff I thought was cool. I wrote things that I really enjoyed writing. I make stuff up and I do a ton of world building based on the existing universe, but I'm not consciously looking at, well, maybe spell rifles should be like this because that's going to fit on the genre. I just thought the idea of spell rifles was cool. And they're an outgrowth of an anime that came out back in the late 90s called Outlaw Star, where the main character had a pistol called a caster, and he had these cartridges and they would fire spells. And I've always thought that concept was cool and sort of just, took it and riffed off it.
Okay, and I've got another question for you from Sarah Weldon. She says, with your giveaway list, what is best, Twitter followers or Amazon followers?
I don't see a lot of use for Twitter followers. Amazon followers are going to buy books, so I would say they're probably an order of magnitude more useful.
And the final question Sarah asks is, any tips for creating your ad blurb?
Create a lot of them. So you're going to create some that are going to be really terrible and some that are going to be really amazing. But I think the key there is volume. So don't get hung up on one blurb because you think it's awesome. And we all tend to do that, where you'll write one and it's pretty good and you'll stop. try to keep writing them and try and keep writing, longer and shorter and just sort of see what looks good. And if you've got yourself a mailing list of an audience that's in this genre, when you have 4 or 5 options that you think are pretty good, do a survey, see what they like. Say, hey guys, what do you think of these blurbs? Which one of these would get you to buy a book? And then when they come back with that feedback, you can use it to sort of determine which one will work best for your audience.
Yeah, always a good idea, I think, to ask your audience, because like you, the thing I think is the best is never the thing that is the most popular with the actual readers. All right, I wanted to ask you about, you've got an anthology too that looks like it came out a couple weeks ago, space fantasy themed. Is that something you put together? It doesn't seem like it would be coincidence that there was just a space fantasy anthology coming out.
Well, theoretically, I mean, it's got my name on it, so yes, I guess technically I did put it together, but really that was my wife. She did all the editing, she formatted the book, so all I did was kind of pick the stories that we're going to work with, and then she did the rest of the work and all the editing. So I don't get to claim credit for it, although I did commission the cover and did the mock-up for that. But yeah, we had a fun time putting that anthology together. I did something a little differently that a lot of authors were surprised by, and I didn't just tell authors, okay, you're in the set. I made them submit a story, and I took the 10 best stories, and I didn't care what the size of their mailing list was. So 2 of these authors have never sold anything to anyone. This is the very first short story they've had published, but I put them in the book because I thought they were good.
Was your goal in putting together the anthology just to try something new, or were you hoping that it would be another way people would find their way to your books?
I was curious to see whether or not it would. I suspected that it wouldn't be as powerful as just releasing a reader magnet as a short story, and that's been borne out. Either I don't know how to sell anthologies, or people are less into them than they are into long fiction. We've sold a fair number of copies. The book is making okay money, but it didn't make a splash anything at all like TechMage did.
And was it always $3.99? I'm just curious if you launched it at 99 cents.
We launched it at 99 cents for the first 5 days, and we were all telling our mailing list. That's where a lot of the sales came from. But the big difference is pages read. We don't see nearly as many page reads a day as I do for a standalone novel. Yeah,
I feel like Amazon made a tweak a while ago and stopped counting all the pages. So like it's with Anthology, if they click to the back, you got all the credit. And it seems like they may have fixed it so they're, if people are just picking out certain stories, that you might only get credit for that.
Yeah, but given the time that I put into it, it wasn't a huge time investment, and seeing a couple of my best friends get to hold a copy of a book with their name on it was totally worth it. So maybe a failed experiment, but still a heck of a lot of fun.
All right, so when you've got a whole launch planned out, and again, it can be a lengthy process. Should you avoid any non-release announcements? Like, should you basically dedicate all of your social media and newsletter punch to the release, or can there be an unrelated promo going on at the same time?
I think there could be an unrelated program going on at the same time. So I had the audio for one book come out right around the same time that TechMage was launching, and I promoted both of them separately, and both of them did just fine.
Now, a lot of people, I mean, we've determined on this show that you can put out newsletters a lot more often than some people think you can. Like, we've had people talk about how at least once a month and as many as once a week you can put out newsletters. But if you're the kind of person who doesn't like to put out a newsletter without having something new to announce, do you feel like setting up an unrelated or semi-related promo and then being able to do sort of a 1-story, 2-story situation might be useful? Like, you do your launch email, and then a week later you talk about, oh, well, the audio of this other book is out, and by the way, don't miss that other launch. Like, is it worth setting it up in that way?
That's usually what I do, definitely. And you'll see a few more people unsubscribe if you email more frequently, but it's more than made up for by the engagement that you get from your list. If you wait too long, they do go cold. I make sure that I email, once every 4 weeks or so, and probably not too much longer than that, but only if I have content. If I have to have a longer gap because I have nothing relevant to say, I'm never going to send my list an email just to say, hey.
Alrighty. Okay, when it comes to anthologies, do you feel first-time authors should actively seek out joining one with the hopes of expanding their reader base? Or should they wait until they have at least a few other titles under their belt?
I would say if you enjoy writing short fiction, go for it, because you are going to get some fans as a result of writing stories and anthologies. Maybe not a ton, but you will get some. One of the 2 authors that is in there and has never published anything already has his first, I want to say, 10 email list signups. So he is ecstatic that people are now signing up to his list. I don't think you should feel compelled, But if the opportunity arises, then you can make a lot of contacts that way. It's fun to work with other authors in your genre. You really get to know people. And, if you are going to be in an anthology like that, I would also consider, as a new author, asking the organizer if there's anything you can help with. Because being smaller, you sort of have to do a little bit more elbow grease, I think, to make up for not having that massive list to help promote it.
All right, that's most of the questions we had for you on launching this, but we did have a couple of Twitter questions. Karen and Dale, I think Karen already asked your questions in mine, so I'm not going to repeat those, but thank you for sending them. Will was wondering, is there, we've kind of covered this too, but I'll go ahead and ask, is there danger in not hitting genre-specific tropes if you go cross-genre and then disappointing the readers?
There definitely is. So you had better know the genres, I think, that you're writing in, because if you break some of those reader expectations, you are going to pay a price. And the best example I can give is with Tech Mage. I'm getting a lot of 2- and 3-star reviews from military science fiction fans who are mad that I've spilled magic all over their science fiction. I'm breaking reader expectations. I know that I'm doing it, and I'm paying a price in terms of my review average as a result.
Yeah, I had a similar experience when my pen name did not anthology, a box set with just a spaceship on the front, no man chests or couples. And there was a book club, and a lot of people picked it up and were like, there's sex in my science fiction. What is going on? And that collection has like the lowest star average for anything she's published. So there you go. Got to have the man chest if you're going to have sex.
Definitely.
But and then Sarah also asked, just you've kind of talked about doing Facebook ads. Are there any other ways? Is there anything special you're doing to market this since it's not quite to market?
No, I once you line everything up, the beauty of working with Amazon is if you get it all right, Amazon's going to do the heavy lifting for the first 60 days in most genres. And if you mess it up, then you can immediately start working on trying the next book or trying the next launch. So I generally know very quickly whether or not it's going to work and where to focus my efforts. And once it is working, like probably 5 days into the Tech Mage launch, I take my foot off the gas and start working on the sequel, and it just sort of keeps selling on its own.
Yeah, I've found that you can only do so much anyway. You can put all your effort into the launch, and then the book is either going to hit the Amazon algorithms and people's tastes, or it's not, and then it'll start dropping off. And I've had both experiences, and I don't always know ahead of time which, for all the advice we've heard on this show, I can't always tell what's going to be a hit.
Yeah, it's funny. I thought that Ganon Wars would be the hit, and this would be the one that flopped, and I was totally wrong about that.
Well, hey, there's nothing like having something that's just a fun project and wasn't necessarily designed to sell tons of books do well.
Yeah, that's why I'm so excited and why I will flog out as many books as I can, because it's so much fun to write this. And the fact that it's actually doing well, I feel like I have a chance to write from the heart for a while and make really good money doing it.
Awesome. And dragons. See, I would have told you. You have dragons, it's going to sell. Now there's going to be a whole bunch of dragon fiction and people are going to be like, why isn't it selling? Lindsay said it would. I hate that show now.
I've already been blamed for that. I've got a quick funny story about the anthology. So what I did on Facebook, I just put a single one line, what I thought was an innocent message. I said, hey, if I put together a space fantasy anthology, would you be interested in contributing? And within 24 hours, I had a couple hundred responses, and I was hearing all over the internet that Chris Fox says that space fantasy is the hot new thing and that everybody should be writing that. And sure enough, within days of my book coming out, I saw 5 more space fantasy books, and there's been a couple of dozen that have come on their heels, and most of them aren't doing terribly well. But a few are starting to break out. But the vast majority of them, I mean, they tried to write to market, assuming I was writing to market. And I think since I wasn't, there wasn't enough for them to copy, and now they're sort of stumbling.
That's funny. And not surprising at all at the same time. So just to wrap up, we'd like to ask you, because you did do the relaunch your novel book since we talked to you last. So we each have a question about that. We're just curious what has been your personal experience on relaunching a series, and are you seeing that it's worth trying for a lot of people?
By and large, what I'm finding is that usually for most authors, it's not worth doing a full relaunch. The amount of effort that it takes for you to edit books and get better covers and work on your blurbs for those books can oftentimes be spent on new books, and that's usually a better use of your time, in my opinion. But that doesn't mean that that's always the case. I did watch Brian Cohen do a great job of relaunching his series, and he made it very profitable, so it can be worth it. but it's sort of big risk, big reward. What I am a big fan of is trying to get enough books in your series that you can do the omnibus, because that's where I've had the best success, is releasing the box sets. Those sell really well. They sell really well on Audible. They sell really well on Amazon. And it is an easy way for you to relaunch your series without actually touching the books that were originally released.
Now, you used the phrase full relaunch a couple times there. How visible a change to the series do you recommend if you're going to be doing a relaunch? Is it always necessary to change the covers and the blurbs, or can you just put a renewed like advertising push behind an older series to try to relaunch it?
It just requires you as the author to assess it. So anything is possible. I've run across some people that really all they can do with a book is just try and promote it again because they did get everything right. And I've had a number of clients come to me who they'll have 1,000+ reviews on a book and they'll want to relaunch it, and they'll talk about getting a new ASIN number. And I'll caution them that's not necessarily a good idea. If you've sold 15 or 20 or 30,000 copies of this book and you suddenly change the cover and or the title and or the blurb and you put out a new product, you're going to piss a lot of people off when they figure out they've read this before.
Jeff?
Oh, I mean, okay. I was looking at the notes. I didn't see anything there, but okay. All right. Let's see here. You just covered my last question, so I have another viewer question for you from Nikolai. Has Chris found a better life-work balance this year? Could he briefly explain what that looks like for himself?
No, I'm terrible at this. So here's how my year went so far. Last year, the books were doing really, really well. I was making a ton of money, and I was totally exhausted. So I decided, you know what, I'm going to take a break from writing for a while. I'm going to write a book from my heart. That was The Great Pack. And if you look at my income earnings, I'll do an income video at the end of the year, and you'll see this 6-month stint, and it's just labeled World of Warcraft. So I spent like 6 months playing World of Warcraft, which is great, and I had a blast. But of course, my income sort of fell. And then I frantically rushed back into work and started working like 90 hours a week and have been ever since. So God, I've been doing it for like 6 months now, running around to various conventions and cranking books out like it's my job, which I guess it kind of is. So I'm really bad at balance. Either I'm 100% on working like a slave, or I'm taking a break entirely and not writing at all.
I think that's what most authors do when they get the bug. Man, they just keep them, just growl at anybody that interrupts them, or else you leave me alone, get me away from a computer. I don't even want to look at the freaking thing. But okay, Lindsay, back over to you.
All right. I guess I'm the opposite. I'm just pretty consistently do the same thing, but I don't do 90-hour work weeks. That would just make me crazy. All right. Well, that's all the questions we have for you. Why don't you, wrap up by letting us know what you're working on now and where people can find you, maybe what books they should check out?
Sure. So I'm still doing fiction and nonfiction. So those authors that are looking for more books from me in the nonfiction vein, the next one is going to be called Plot Gardening. That'll be out at the end of January. And basically it covers outlining for pantsers in a way that I think that people can get behind. So it's a little more organic than most of the rigid story structure that we follow, and it focuses very much on developing our characters. And I decided it was time to get into some crafts, so I'll have that coming out. As far as the fiction goes, I'm going to be cranking out Magitech Chronicles for the foreseeable future, but I do have a new book coming out next year. It's going to be tentatively called the Relic Hunter series, where the main character is loosely based on Wesley from Buffy and Angel. So think incompetent early season 1 Wesley. And he's got a pair.
I'm not even sure I remember that character.
Oh, he was a watcher. I think you would if you saw it. He was a pretty important character, but just a bumbling professor who is not really good at anything. And he ends up with a pair of magical pistols that keep dragging him into combat. And he's a coward. He doesn't want to do this. So it's going to be my first attempt at comedy, and we'll see what I do with that.
All right. That sounds awesome. Although when you said you were going to work on craft, I thought you said crafts. And I'm like, Chris is going to do a knitting book or doilies or something? All right.
Sure.
the secret side you've never shared in your YouTube videos. All right, guys. This has been episode 156, and I'll put the link to your most recent books and your crafts site that you haven't put together yet up on the show notes, and I'll find your Magitech. Send me that link after the show, and I'll put that in there too, so people can see what you've been doing there. And thanks so much for joining us. Apparently, it's the 4th time. I thought it was the 3rd,
a few times now.
5th. We like having you, Chris. And thank you for listening, everyone.
I love chatting with you guys. I wish you lived closer so we could just hang out.
That's right. All right. Well, we'll keep doing the conventions, and we'll get Joe and Jeff to come to the next one.
That'd be great.
All right. Well, thanks for hanging out with us again.
All right, guys. Thanks for having me.
So long, everybody.